Now, I'm going to bring in a great friend of mine from the White House days and before, Brooke Rollins, who was former director of the Domestic Policy Council under President Trump. And she's now the president and CEO of the America First Policy Institute. We'll talk a little bit about that. Full disclosure, I am her vice chair and helping out on the economy. Brooke is an old friend and a smart lady. Brookie, you out there, by the way?
Here I am.
Oh, good.
Larry, good morning.
By the way, did your boy win the Texas World Series? What happened?
Thank you for asking. Luke Rollins, my oldest of four, is 16 and played in a championship game last night in Huntsville, Texas, and unfortunately ran out of time, but my goodness, he had a great game. He's a center fielder and second at bat, and he's a little superstar. So didn't win the game, but had a great night.
All right, good stuff. Glad to hear that.
For asking.
Now, we'll get around to talking about America First Policy Institute, but I want to begin, the big discussion is, of course, Biden's State of the Union and all that has come before and after the 100 days. Brookie, put your thinking cap on here. Of all the things you've heard from President Biden, what do you think is the most damaging? What do you think is the most damaging policy that you think you've heard so far? And I'm going to leave it open because, the story is just beginning 100 days. But thus far, Brookie, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's a long laundry list. But if I had to point to one thing, the opening up of this new era, the floodgates of spending, the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, the Green New Deal is part of that, the, quote, infrastructure package that's not really infrastructure, the free junior college, the free pre-kindergarten, the free child care. He's spending down America's inheritance, and it really is a march toward a socialist, redistributed government that we haven't seen talked about in this country, at least in my lifetime. And it's interesting, Larry, thinking back to the 1983 Great Britain race when Margaret Thatcher was taking on the Labour Party. And if you remember, she was not supposed to win. They were not supposed to win that in 1983. But they put out, the Labour Party, the Liberals put out a long sort of manifesto of what they wanted to do, strikingly similar, frankly, to Biden's speech on Wednesday night. And it was called basically the longest suicide note in history because it laid out a vision that Great Britain did not want. And I believe Biden did the exact same thing on Wednesday night. I think the American people are against socialism. They're against the redistribution of wealth. They're against spending my children and my future grandchildren's inheritance and the great American dream. And I think that's what happened. But there's one thing, it would have to be the spending, Larry.
Yep. So I was talking to Phil Gramm, former Senator Phil Gramm. I know he's a great friend of yours and mine, and a mentor. And we got on the subject of this great society type welfare state expansion, and in particular, Brooke, the idea that the government will now give cash benefits, and the recipient does not have to work or even look for a job, which really breaks with tradition of the past 25 years, going back to Clinton Gingrich. But in any case, this opens up, I think, a new and catastrophic avenue for the future. You can go down the laundry list of things, particularly the child tax credits, but all kinds of child care, daycare, pre-kindergarten. Nobody has to work to get benefits, and that's a problem. And we talked about it with Phil, and it lowers the dignity of work. It lowers the morale. I call it demoralizing. People just can stay on welfare and what did Phil say? It makes it harder for people to go on their way. And I wanted to get your take on this because I know you were doing a lot of welfare work in the White House and before then. Dignity of work, Brookie. I mean, work is godly, if you ask me.
There's no doubt about that. And I think what we saw and helped execute with President Trump in the 4 years was the exact alternative. to what the left and the Democrats are laying out right now. And that, we lifted up the concept of dignity of work. We saw the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the lowest for women in nearly 70 years. Wages were growing faster. You know this better than anyone, Larry, but wages were growing faster for the bottom 25% than the top 25%. And that's because we focused on expanding opportunity and providing that dignity of work lane that had never really happened to this extent before the last administration, before President Trump and Vice President Pence took back Washington and returned the power to the people. So to your and my precious Senator Phil Graham's point, that's 1,000% right. And I think that's always what has made America so different, that it was about self-governance. It was never about an elite or a monarchy or a dictatorship deciding what was best for us. We got to decide for ourselves. And in so doing, we were not tied to the government's dole. We were not dependent on the government's handouts. We weren't hopeful that the check was coming in the mail so we could go buy groceries. We could do it ourselves. And that resulted in the greatest country in the history of civilization, and that's America. But the reason is because it wasn't about those living at the top of the economic ladder. It was about the opportunities for those at the bottom of that ladder. And the left is deconstructing that at a pace. Joe Biden is deconstructing that at a pace that I'm not sure we've seen, again, at least in my lifetime, and maybe yours too. It's really, really jarring to witness. Having said that, the majority of America doesn't agree with this. And I sincerely believe the elections are where we judge the results of an administration in many ways. And we'll see sort of a pushback on this in less than 2 years with the House and the Senate elections.
Well, it's funny. I was looking through, as I always do when I have Phil Graham on as a guest, TV or radio, I take a lot of notes on my index card. So we got to talking about this, Brooke Rollins. And so he said, giving money for not working, and all it does is create dependencies. He went back to FDR, and it's very interesting. FDR required work for money. It was the Great Society programs that began to take that away. Then Clinton Gingrich brought it back. But in addition to giving money for not working and creating dependency, Phil said, this is a good point, takes away the joy of making your way in life. I love that. The joy of climbing the ladder of opportunity, the joy of getting ahead. And that is the dignity of work, which is so important. Now, I will never forget a meeting I had in the Oval. We had a bunch of senators and House members. It was the Farm Bill, Brooke. And the part of the Farm Bill, and there was bipartisan support for this, was to expand. God knows we gave a lot of money to the farm community, but expanding what we used to call food stamps. And President Trump was listening to that, but his argument was, okay, but you have to have work requirements. And he argued it, and he's looking at me, and I argued it. I always believe in that stuff, but he believed in that stuff. Work requirements have to be part of these federal assistance programs. And unfortunately, it didn't work. We couldn't get it through. Senate Agriculture Committee couldn't get it through. The Republican leader in the House Ag Committee wanted it, but he was the minority guy by that time. So let me ask you this. In terms of, you're running this America First Policy Institute, which is going to be very important. It's Trump legacies, policies, and principles, but even more than that, you're going to develop alternatives and options to Biden policies. Can you get a real movement going with, white papers and media appearances and whatnot to restore work requirements? Because I think in many ways this is the most pernicious part of this whole crazy Biden program.
I do think, I don't know that we'll be able to under a Nancy Pelosi regime, but I think as long as and this is the importance of organizations like the America First Policy Institute, there has to be an intellectual grounding, almost an intellectual offensive play on why these issues are so important. I live in Texas, which I believe is the land of opportunity and freedom, kind of reminding the rest of America what America used to stand for in total, and now really is just exemplified in the red states, frankly. But here in Texas, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Ray Washburn, who was in the administration, owns restaurants all across the country. He's got 500 spots open right now he can't fill. And this is with fairly high unemployment as a result of COVID. But the problem is because people make more money staying home and getting their government check. And he doesn't pay, these are good jobs. But more people are staying home. And I know we hear these stories across the country that listen, the government is going, when it incentivizes people to stay home and not look for a job, then that's what it's going to get. It's a market question. And so the importance of putting work and work requirements, and in Texas, we've done that at a state level for years and years. So there's not surprising, we have lower unemployment and lower poverty than almost every other state, but especially California, which is a very similar size state, similar economy. But the importance of work in all of this really can't be underscored. And I'm glad that you're spending a little time thinking about it and talking about it to all of your listeners, because it really needs to become an important narrative as we move forward into the rest of the public policy.
Listen, so you got me in charge in the America First Policy Institute. You got me in charge of the economy, which is where I belong. So I'm not poaching. I'm not leaving my lane. Okay. But I just want to say to you, and all our listeners, you've got to put together a welfare and workfare operation with smart people. Probably ought to tap into Phil Gramm, by the by, but there are many others. Put out a complete alternative to what Biden is suggesting. I mean, go down the laundry list, Brookie, of his, in this infrastructure package, which is, of course, a Trojan horse for high taxes, a Trojan horse for the Green New Deal, and a Trojan horse for a gigantic expansion of the welfare state, again, without work. We've got to rebut this. We need a, constructive policy paper to show what should be happening and to show why cash benefits without work requirements is a real bad idea. And by the way, there are major economic consequences to that, too, because the workforce gets slimmer and slimmer, participation rate gets slimmer, so you can't produce goods and services without workers. But you see what I'm saying? I'm urging you, begging you, as our CEO, you are the chief. You are the number one chief in this thing. You need a welfare workfare operation going. How's that?
Yeah, you're 1,000% right, and we've got the team to do it. They're already looking at it. So, we'll stay tuned. We'll have something out on that very soon. And the good news is, Larry, that based on what we achieved in the last 4 years under President Trump in terms of the numbers, I know there's some people who didn't love the tweeting and didn't love kind of the unconventional approach of our former boss. But at the end of the day, you can't argue with the results and seeing what the results look like. And granted, the stock market did great and the 401ks did great, but the biggest story, frankly, is what happened to those who had never had that dignity, who had never had that good job, who could have never had been proud before of what they were to accomplish during a day. And they were for the first time. And so providing that alternative and outlining exactly what's wrong with what's happening today, right now in Washington, is a really important part of what AFPI is going to be working on and what we'll do together.
Yeah, we've got to combat this destructive notion that the government can provide all kinds of cash benefits for all kinds of activities without work requirements. And to some extent, even education, like, high school education requirements too. But I'm getting on. The more I listen to Biden talk about this stuff, the angrier I get, because it's just totally wrong. And we worked for a guy who really insisted on workfare. And you and I are not opposed to a safety net, right? We're not opposed to a safety net.
100%.
Right?
No, that's
it just has to be done smart. Huh?
Amen. That's exactly right, Larry.
All right, we got to get off. They're pushing us off, Brookie Rollins. Thank you ever so much for your time on a Saturday. Tell your boy there'll be another day in the baseball tournament, and I'll talk to you very soon. All right,
that
folks.
Sounds great.
Take care.